my super traditional question. The question that I ask all speakers, like, how did you earn your first money? Because we're all about entrepreneurship here, so that's the first super typical. And like this question always has amazing answers.
As an adult or as a kid? Or just first money, period?
I mean, like, let's call it like entrepreneurial money.
Paper route.
Oh.
Newspapers, right? Delivering newspapers and collecting money.
Oh.
Yeah, so I did that when I was 12? No, 10. Yeah, 10 or something. Yeah, so young.
And was it like a huge business success?
Oh, I mean, it was just like, I mean, but that was my first money. I mean, that was a lot of money back then. It's like $20, $30 a month. It's a lot for a kid.
And what was the second job?
Second job, Burger King. Like McDonald's.
Okay. And the next one?
I had a lot of jobs. So I worked in a bookstore, then taught English for many years, for about a year and a half. And then my resume is a disaster up until probably I was like 26 or 27. So I had 3 jobs. So I was at Anheuser-Busch. That was my first real job. So I was a brand manager there. I lasted about 6 weeks. I just didn't want to drink all the time, right? So, and then I did management consulting for a couple months. I didn't want to do all that work, even though pay was really good. And then I was at Exxon, the big oil company, and I lasted maybe like a month and a half, only because my visa ran out, and so I had to move back to the US. And then after that, I was in PR, and then that didn't work out, but then I got to startups after that. So I've spent 20 years now in San Francisco, so I moved to the US in '99. My first job in San Francisco, I worked at a PR firm. It's a company called Porto Novelli. It's probably the number 3 biggest PR firm in the world. And I was terrible at it, so they fired me on my birthday. It's really bad at it. But that was actually very fortunate, and then that's how I got into startups. So my next role, I joined a startup that had raised about $30 million. I was their first marketing hire, and then I ran their marketing for 2 years.
And when actually the big company career came in, I mean the Yahoo story.
So what happened, I spent 2 years at the startup, and so this is during 99, 2000, 2001. So we went from about 18 employees to 150 people in like less than a year, 6 months. And then of course the dot-com bubble burst, and it kind of went the other way. And it went from about 150 to about 75 people. I survived that, and then it went down to like about 45 people, and I did not survive that. So I was out of work for almost 5 months, literally down to my last $500, and then the Yahoo opportunity came. So I joined Yahoo back in 2001, June of 2001, and Yahoo at that time was about 2,800 people, and then I had left Yahoo 10 and a half years later on, and we were about 15,000 people after we fired 4,000 people.
So what was the reason to join Yahoo? Was it like the only job offered?
It was literally the only work that was actually available. So if you look, I mean, you all look all very young, right? So in 2001, I don't know if you forget, like San Francisco in 2001 was a complete disaster zone, right? Because all the dot-com companies died, and so there were literally only like 4 companies that were hiring in 2001. It was Yahoo, eBay, Microsoft, and Google. So nobody else was hiring.
Wow, and what actually are the main outcomes of this years spent in Yahoo? Because later on you joined the startup world, but what are the takeaways from that?
I mean, people forget, so the lesson I got out of Yahoo was that I never realized what it's like working with like super smart people until I joined Yahoo. And I never realized how hard it is to actually scale an operations, right? Because Yahoo right now, it's not around, but back then in like 2001 to about like 2006, like that was one of the fastest growing companies. That was one of the companies that, if you look back at a lot of successful people in Silicon Valley now, most of them are all ex-Yahoo people. So actually becoming part of an alumni, so for example, like eBay was kind of the place to be from like, I'm gonna say 2003 to like 2000. There's always a 5-year, every major company has this 5-year period where there's just, you work with amazing people, and it went through just like magic actually happened. And I was very, very fortunate for Yahoo. That was like from 2002 to about 2007. And so all the people I worked with during that time have all ended up in very influential roles in venture capital, across the startup ecosystem in big companies. And so these are all the people that have become my alumni, right? And so it's like the same story of like a lot of people who were in, I would say from Google from like 2004 to 2009, like that was a magical period for Google. All the best people now came from Google, right? Or if you look at all the people from like, I would say Facebook, the magical years of Facebook, I would argue from like 2009 to like 2013, 2014, all the best people work there. And now they're all over the place now. And so being part of alumni, like the PayPal Mafia is like the most famous example. Like everybody in the PayPal Mafia has gone on to do amazing things, and being part of the alumni of that is just magical. And so I got lucky. It wasn't smart or anything. I just got super lucky.
So actually, this alumni club, does it really help now with the 500 startups?
I mean, so part of my job at 500 Startups, I'm a partner over there. So I invest as an investor, but I also run the Startup Accelerator. And that's been very, very helpful because when my companies want to go talk to somebody, like I'm looking for a contact at YouTube, I'm looking for a contact at BuzzFeed, like I know somebody, I go, you should talk to this person, who's a colleague of mine, or I'm looking for an investor, and I'm like, well, I know this person because like this person I used to work with at Yahoo, and we're friends. And so it's actually incredibly helpful.
And so, okay, then your role in Yahoo, was it more like operational or creative, or like what actually you were doing?
So I had 5 different jobs at Yahoo. I spent there 10.5 years there, which is very unusual for Silicon Valley to spend that much time at a company, but I was very fortunate. They treated me very well. It was an amazing company to work for, lots of smart people, but also I just got to do a lot of different things. So my first two years there, I was a brand manager in the international marketing group, and that was amazing. And then I spent 2 years running global sales operations, so rolling out a lot of like back office, CRM systems, pricing, ad operations. So I got to see a lot of like the operational things behind the ad business. And then I spent 2 years doing sales strategy and ad products and rolling that out across the globe. And then I spent 2 years in the emerging markets group. So I ran Middle East, Africa, Eastern Europe. And then I ran sales strategy for all the emerging markets groups. So I got to spend a lot of time in Latin America, in India, just like all over different parts. And then my last 2 years, I was a commercial director and general manager for the MEA region. So I ran everything in Europe, Middle East, and Africa, except for UK, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. So I ran a big part of the operations for that group. And that was also an amazing experience because you actually get like real P&L experience, right? Profit and loss. I don't think you're a real business person unless you actually manage like everything that drives like the profit and loss of organization. And so I got to do that for 4 years. That was amazing.
And how does it differ, like, to do the operations in US and in Europe? Like, what are the key differences, or did it just differ because of the role? Because the role was different, not the market.
I mean, the markets are significantly different, right? And so what I definitely see, that was helpful of just really understanding. I did product launches and business launches in, I think, like 40 plus countries. And so really understanding a lot of the cultural differences was helpful. And also why a lot of my, I had some successes, I had a lot of failures as well too. So understanding and looking back with a large data set like that was helpful to understand, okay, what was the reason that we failed here? Was it because we didn't understand the local culture? Was it some competitive thing? Was it because we didn't launch the product or didn't have the right product for the market? All these things were really helpful. And having such a big sample set, just like similar to sort of my sample set now as an investor, it helps you figure out the pattern recognition and do it better.
So speaking of the pattern recognition, like you talk a lot about product market fit and like product language fit. So what actually makes it like a successful product now? Because, well, what was there in 2003, 2013, and 2019 is pretty different. I mean, because you launched so many different products historically.
Yeah, so one of the products that actually I think worked really well in a lot of markets was like Yahoo Mail, right? Like that was a huge success in a lot of markets. But Yahoo Messenger was not a success versus, say, for example, in Romania. I spent a lot of time in Romania because Messenger was like the dominant platform in Romania. It had like 90% market share, right? Like over anybody else. So that was a way that we expanded our product set based on the Messenger service, right? So what I've learned with markets and where I think Yahoo really broad, and this is actually relevant for startups, the problem when I talk to startup founders, I ask them, okay, who's your customer and what's your product set? And the problem for them is that it's too wide. So when you have a new product and you're trying to get into a market, you actually want to have a very, very narrow customer segment and a very, very narrow product feature, where it's almost like one product feature that is like 10 times better than anything else out there. And that's how you get into the market. When you go too wide, you go nowhere. And so that's something I see. And now, like I said, I've invested in the last 5.5 years now, I've invested in over 476 companies, right? Like, through the accelerator, through the seed fund. And one of the regular things I see that a lot of companies mess up is that they go too wide in the beginning, and so they can't get any real customer traction.
But like the 470 something, like over 5 years, is like every 5 days you need to invest, or like is it?
Well, we invest in batches, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason so that we can do high volume. So for a typical accelerator batch, I'll look at anywhere between 2,500 companies to 3,000 companies, so filter through that to get down to anywhere between 30 to 45 companies. And so when you do that twice a year, or some cases, there were a couple of years we were doing that 3 times a year, you can add up the numbers pretty fast.
And so you do the selection, but like, are you involved in mentoring, coaching them?
Yeah, so as part of the accelerator, we spend 4 months with the company. So we spend a lot of time with the companies, at least for those 4 months.
I mean, like personally you as a mentor.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time. I mean, that's why I work.
Like how many hours can you spend with one team in a batch?
I mean, here's the thing, right? Like, there are some times where it's very, very regular. Sometimes you'll spend like 10 hours a week, and other times you'll spend like maybe 1 hour, nothing. And so it varies depending on the problems, because these problems come in waves, or their needs actually come in waves, right? So I would say it's very inconsistent.
And how many other like key mentors or key coaches are involved helping you?
Yeah, I have 15 full-time, part-time people on my team, right? So I don't do this alone, right? I can't do this alone. It's impossible.
Okay, and like how many teams from EMEA region where you have been operating at Yahoo have you already seen in a batch in 500?
So my portfolio is probably about 30% international, and out of that, from the EMEA region, it's probably about half. But I also have I've had a lot of companies from Brazil, I have a lot of companies from Canada, but I would say in general, EMEA is a big chunk, right? Because of just my background or whatever, I tend to get a lot of European companies.
Okay.
Or EMEA region companies.
And so today we're gonna go more for metrics and teams and stuff like that, and one more small warm up. So teams, metrics, investments, all this stuff. Like personally, not for the company, but like in your own life. What's the best team so far? What's the best investment? Because like you always like think a lot about business, but then it just turned to like, do I apply the same stuff in my life? Like,
So you mean personal investment?
yeah,
Is that
like
what you mean?
personal. What's the best personal investment? What's the best personal team?
For me,
Yeah.
like nothing to do with business.
Yeah, nothing to do with business. Because sometimes you just need to refocus, step back, and step forward. Because it's easier to see an object when you when you change the focus.
I mean, for me, I'm a dad, right? So my best investment is my kid, right? Like my daughter is the best thing ever, right? Like there's nothing better than that.
Yeah, and what's the key metric?
That's a great question, because I really
I
wrestle
mean,
with that.
in your life, I mean, like, how do you estimate the success with which metric?
I wrestle with this all the time, right? So as you know, I'm an immigrant kid, right? My parents were Taiwanese, grew up in Canada, and so we didn't have a lot of money when I grew up. And also, if you ever hear about sort of growing up under sort of a Taiwanese or Chinese immigrant household, your parents, like, I love them, but they're brutal, right? Like, they're brutal. You have very, very high expectations, and that's actually how I've learned to sort of treat my companies. So if you actually ask any of my companies in general, I'm like the immigrant sort of like tiger dad or tiger mom, right? Whatever you do is never good enough. And so I love my parents, because I'm where I am right now because of this upbringing. But the problem with that is that you are never satisfied, right? Whatever level you get to, like, it's never good enough. It's the same thing. That's how I treat my company, so they perform well. But that is a problem, is you're never happy. If that makes sense, right? You're always dissatisfied. And so I've been I'm trying to be very careful trying to raise my kid. I want them to be happy, but not too happy. Because if you're happy and comfortable, you actually don't get anything accomplished, right? So I think a lot about like a lot of my like rich friends who I grew up with. A lot of them have not really done anything with their lives, right? Because they're comfortable, They never have to worry about anything. And so I think it's trying to figure out the balance of like, I don't think what I do is like healthy either, right? Like, but at the same time, I'm like, at least I'm like trying to do stuff versus sort of, I think like this is my biggest issue, I think, with like, and I've said this on stage and it has not been very popular, but I go, you know, growing up in Canada, there's a reason I left Canada because I think life is really good in Canada. So I think people are lazy. And I also think it's the same thing in Europe. I think like a lot of Western Europe they're lazy. It's just because life is really good. If you have everything or life is comfortable, you never know that you're gonna lose everything. Like it's not tough, life is not tough. You actually don't get anything accomplished. And that's why a lot of the startup ecosystem in a lot of Western Europe is kind of stillborn. Is because a lot of people don't want to work hard and they're like, no matter what, like everything's great, right? And that's actually why I spent a lot of time in Central Eastern Europe, is because, let's be frank, like I always spent a lot of time in Ukraine, like life isn't that easy. And that's why, generally speaking, work ethic is much better.
Okay.
It's true, right?
Okay, one more.
Observation.
One more refocus. What's the best personal investment so far?
For me personally, it's actually investing in my own education. I don't mean university, I don't mean school. I invest a lot of my own money and time into going to conferences, into taking classes. I spend a lot of money on books. You'd be surprised at how many books I actually have. I think something like 7,000, 8,000 books, which is kind of a little bit overboard, but that's my problem, right? So it's better than drugs or spending it on other stuff, so that's how I rationalize it. But I have a lot of books. I love books. I spend a lot of time reading. Like the investment in yourself, I actually think is the most important thing.
So, and how does actually education, I mean, other than reading the books, correlate with startups and being successful with the startup or with business?
I think if you are not self-taught or not a learner, so if you come in, right, this is a signal of a non-successful person or a non-successful founder, non-successful business person, non-successful person regardless, somebody who thinks they know everything, right? And so the reality is that the best founders are somewhat confident, but also at the same time willing to sort of like learn and take cues and see sort of what's out there, right? Because you can have this is the great thing with sales, and I did sales for many years, and that was incredibly helpful because you can have all the theories that you think that a customer wants to buy, but going out to the market and seeing and pitching them, they go, not interested, it's actually like a punch in the face, right? And that's actually incredibly helpful. And so you have to take cues and learn.
So other than like good sales, what else do you look for in a good balanced team? Like speaking back to business, when you select the teams, like what are you looking at?
So I'm looking for somebody who's super hungry. I'm looking for a balanced team, someone that's actually strong on the business side, somebody that's actually strong on the technical side, and even better now, you know, especially in this day and age, someone that's actually really good on the design side. So UX, so I mean design, it's not like nice colors or whatever, it's actually more on like user experience. And I actually think like the problem with a lot of products right now, particularly in the B2B side, the user experience sucks, right? And so you look at Oracle, look at Salesforce, look at all these like old software sort of things, they're awful. Like they're not easy to use. And I actually think that is the bare minimum you actually need to have now. It's just like really easy to use product. Could be a hardware product, could be a software product, but something that's really, really easy to use. And that really requires good understanding and good process.
And like from all of your investments, maybe there was an example of such a good B2B user flow process, like something that really inspired you and like, you still remember that investment.
Yeah, so this company, Albert, like it's a consumer product, but I would say the B2B side, Shippo, so it's like goshippo.com, like really good, simple product.
Okay, and other than B2B, what are other like super scalable, attractive models?
I mean, in general, I think as a VC, right, this is, I really think that there's a lot of startups here, and the reality is that some startups, and maybe a good portion of startups, not just in this room, but in general, actually should never ever go and try to raise VC money. And so there's certain business models I think are very VC fundable, in my opinion, right? So marketplace businesses, or what we call the embed business model, which is usually enterprise sales. So for example, once somebody starts to use your product, input the data. So have you heard of a company called Xero, Xero? It's like accounting software. or like Intuit. You know Intuit? Yeah. So products like that, where you're uploading all your information all the time, or like a CRM system, once you start to use it, you get lock-in effects, right? Those are very, very attractive VC business models. Business models where there's no lock-in effects, e-commerce. E-commerce is not like you can buy from this site or you can buy from another one. Most of the time, there's no lock-in effects for these businesses. So a lot of times they're not, in my opinion, now, they're not usually VC fundable, right? Or a lot of the mobile app businesses, a lot of them are not VC fundable because there's actually no real lock-in, right? And so think about the fact that, and there's no clear differentiation, so think about the fact that most people use maybe 4 or 5 apps on a regular basis, but there's literally, I think, like 1 million, 1.6, 1.7 million apps on the Apple App Store, right? Just so much noise. And so the likelihood of somebody downloading the app and actually using that on a regular basis, pretty low. And so that's why the customer acquisition costs are so brutal for them.
Yeah, so what's the good channel now? I mean, because we've already gone through era of Google Ads, we've gone through era of
Facebook,
we've gone through era of good product in an app store and it works. So what's the era now?
I mean, that's a billion-dollar question, right? But the answer to that is it depends. It depends on whether you're business to business or business to consumer. I actually think that the two, I'm going to say it's really one. The one sort of channel that a lot of folks have not spent a lot of time on is actually YouTube. I actually think YouTube is actually very interesting. I think depending on your industry, I think like Instagram is kind of interesting right now, although there's just a lot of money and a lot of people flood costs. But even basic things, email. I actually think email is still underutilized, particularly B2B, and even on the consumer side. I think if you're consumer, you're B2B, you should build up your email list. I actually think that is one of the most like underutilized channels in general, still.
Right. So speaking of growth hacking and like choosing the best channel, like in metrics, in data and in analytics, how do you actually distinguish what's like really cool working and what is not? Like, because sometimes it's like flat. It's like neither good nor bad.
Yeah, but the thing is, when your business is actually flat, it means that you have not. It's not even a channel thing. I think for me, it means that you have not really figured out who your core customers are. You have not really understood sort of what the real value of your product is. So I'm familiar with this thing called like the R metrics, right? You know, like acquisition, activation, retention, referral. And I actually think for most startups, in general, a lot of people focus on the acquisition piece, and that's actually wrong. I actually think for most startups, it's actually really an activation and a retention issue. And it's also because I actually think if you are not growing or you have a lot of high churn, it's because you are not getting the right customers in place. You actually don't have a good, like it's so interesting in Silicon Valley. You think of a lot of companies have figured this out. They've raised like $5 million. You know, the business seems to be working really well, but their churn rate's really high. It's surprising to me how many companies are making, even $100,000, $300,000 a month, and they still haven't figured out who their core customers are, and they don't know why they're buying and doing what they're doing. Really surprising to me. And that happens because a lot of times there's a huge element of luck. If you launch this product, it's a beautiful product, but they don't do the analytics and just grow naturally. And that's unusual, but it does happen where they still have no idea why they're growing. They don't know which channels are growing, whether it's grown organically because it's a really well-designed product and there's a lot of word of mouth. But what ends up happening with that is they raise a lot of money, but because they don't understand who their customers are and they haven't really dug into the customer segmentation yet, they can't grow from that point. And so you see a lot of companies hit like 1 million or hit 5 million in revenue and then just sort of plateau because they don't know these basic things. Very common.
But in terms of numbers, how would you describe good retention? Like, what is good? Is it like still live on like week 12?
So general, I think it's usually like we track on, like it's like weekly, monthly, 90-day retention. All these things are helpful to go and track, right? And obviously it depends on the product. So there's going to be significant differences if you're a consumer product versus a B2B product. There's going to be significant differences between whether you're entertainment versus utility, right? So if you're a gaming product, I would say in general, not that I'm an expert in gaming, you may not have a lot of high usage, right? Versus say, for example, if you're in the B2B side, like a utility, like an Evernote or something, your usage should actually be fairly high, right? Or if you're like a CRM system, your usage should be super, super high because it's something you're using every single day. And so a lot of it really depends on the use case, right? There's certain products, and that's why I always ask about the use case. I always try to dig in a little bit more when they talk about retention. I go, okay, great, like you have like awesome like 1 week retention, but the use case is actually maybe less frequent, right? So is that the right one? So just matching the use case with the retention rate is really important. So there's a lot of nuance in these questions.
And so to basically analyze this data, and when you select the teams, right? So what's the minimum like volume of traffic that you need to have to be like analyzable? Because maybe you just come with like 1,000 users saying like, I have good retention.
Yeah, and sometimes that's okay, right? Because I think a lot of it, so this is why pre-seed and seed stage, which is what we invest in, is really, really hard. It's a lot more art than science. And so my last batch, for example, probably about 1/3 of my companies were pre-launch, right? No stats, nothing, but I made a bet on the team, right?
But how do you make a bet? Like this?
I would say less of that. I think a lot of it is based on the people, right? And so here's my opinion. I think in pre-seed and seed, like if you're investing purely based on traction, I don't think you're a great investor. And so that's why fundamentally I disagree with what I see in Europe. I disagree with what I see a lot like in sort of like even on the east coast of the US, a lot of investors, even in Silicon Valley, a lot of early stage investors only care about traction. And I'm like, if it was just based on traction for any, sort of any investments, like for successive investments, then anybody could be an investor, right? And what I actually found for a lot of my best investments were really team-based with some market, like 70% team, 30% market. Because if you bet on the right team, they'll end up pivoting eventually and they'll pivot into the right market. And so a lot of times, I think the best founders and the best entrepreneurs are like private investigators. They're trying to find the truth, right? They're asking a lot of questions, they have the right process, kind of like Sherlock Holmes, right? You're trying to find the truth. And in having some vision of what you want to build, but using the market and questioning the market to see sort of like, are you building the right thing? Are you going the right direction? And so a lot of times my best investments, my best performing investments, almost all of them universally were pre-launch companies, which is I look back on it and I'm like, oh, and I understand like looking back on it where the right founder, right space where there wasn't a lot of competition, and they had a very clear view, but yet they also had a process to get there.
So speaking about the founders, like sometimes there's such concept as serial entrepreneur. Like is it a red flag or yellow flag or green flag?
Yeah, I question, right? And so I think about like every time someone says I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I'm like, you heard the term serial killer, right? Like that's sort of what I think of, just like serial is like that's not really the right term. But having said that, I do admire people who try these things because like if you look at a lot of the successful founders now, a lot of times they tried many, many times. And so what I've learned with, and this is I think a very Silicon Valley thing, of just you have to have there's this term based on baseball, right? Shots at bat. And so how many times you're swinging is important. But I also look at it too, just like whether you're an employee, whether you're a startup founder, you want to take a lot of shots on bat, but you also want to make sure that they've also spent a lot of time on these businesses. If I see a founder that's kind of changed ideas like every single year, right? Like that to me means like, okay, this person is just like, what are you doing? It's like an employee, right? When you look at somebody where you look at their resume, it lasts like 5 years at like 5 different jobs. I actually think it takes at least like 2 years, like 2 to 3 years to go and see the results of the things that you worked on, to go and see the actual results and learn from that. And so somebody's just hopping from idea to idea to idea, I'm not sure that's a great sign for me, right? But if you worked on something for like 2 years, and then it didn't work out, that's fair, because you should have enough data, right? You've tried something for 2 years and you should have enough data to go and see this is not working, or clearly this, this doesn't make sense anymore. That's fine. You worked on something, like I have an entrepreneur, they worked on this thing for 6 months, and they're like, yeah, it's not working, I'm gonna quit. I'm like, okay, I don't know. I'm like, I don't know if I'd find this entrepreneur again.
So, other than serial entrepreneur, what else could be a red flag?
This is just my bias. Academics turned entrepreneur, I don't find them to be very good. This may be a very US thing, because in academia, right, it's just a very different mindset. They're far away from the market, they're not very commercial, and so this is very different than biotech. I'm talking software, but I find that a lot of times they have they have difficulty operating at the tempo they need to operate. They have no sense of urgency, and also they have a hard time prioritizing. And so I find academics turn startup entrepreneurs I've not seen a lot of success there. Or the other one I've seen is big company people turn entrepreneur. They have a very hard time adjusting.
But I mean, you're the person who.
I did, but I spent 2 years making a lot of mistakes and spending a lot of time with startups to go and realize, oh wow, this is such a different. I had to go and unlearn. And also remember, I did startups before I joined a big company. So I would say a very different profile, right? So for example, I've invested in many big company turned entrepreneurs, and it takes probably about a year to unlearn all the bad habits you learned, right? Like in a big company. So the great thing, I think, working in a big company, you understand scale, you understand processes. That's incredibly helpful. But they don't understand scrappiness. And so, for example, you work at a big company, you have a business model that works already. You already know who your customers are. That's a big part of versus a startup. You don't know who your customer is. You haven't figured out the product yet. Actually, you don't know anything yet, right? So there's a lot of you don't know what the business model is. So you're spending the first couple of years figuring out all these things of who's my customer. Then based on that, if that's my customer, what's the product I need to build for them? What are the features? Versus you work at a big company, you have a lot of budget. You have marketing budget. You already know who your customer is. There's a lot of things that you have to figure out, and also you have a lot of resources. So you're not very scrappy.
So, but still, there's a lot of risk of running startup compared to a big company.
I would disagree, right? So here a lot of people go and say, oh, being at a startup is so risky, right? And I go, actually, so if you think about it, let's say you're a startup or you're an entrepreneur and you have 4 customers, right? 4 hopefully paying customers. That's 4 revenue streams. You are an employee, you have 1 revenue stream. And this is especially risky, I think, if you're a big company. So you go, oh, I'm in a big company, nothing will happen to me. That's actually not true. So this is something an exercise I tell anybody, just go and do a Google alerts for layoffs or mass layoffs. If you look at that and you'll literally get several Google alerts every single day of this company fired 10,000 people, this company fired 4,000 people. You'll see that every single day, and you go, wow, which one's more risky, right? You have 1 revenue stream versus 4 revenue streams. Which one's riskier?
I'm from Nokia, by the way.
Well, I mean, right? Right? It is pretty risky working at a big company, right? And I also think the bigger the company, the more you are actually hidden away from the market. And what I mean, the market of market forces, right? Hidden away from customers, hidden away from, so this is actually, I loved working at Yahoo, but remember, I was at Yahoo from 2001 to end of 2011, beginning of 2012. And so remember, 3-4 years, say in 2008, 2009, and I live in San Francisco. I had no idea about Airbnb, Instagram, and these are all companies where a lot of my friends worked at. I had no idea this stuff was going on at Uber, right? So when I left Yahoo and I started spending time with my friends and talking to people, I'm like, holy crap, all this stuff happened the last 3-4 years. I had no idea because most of my time was spent serving my customers. And I would say being at a big company, being an exec at a big company, you spend 70% of your time internally politicking, right? So I have all these resources. Yeah, on paper, we had tons of money, tons of resources, but you're fighting other business groups and other executives for these resources. So I was spending 70% of my time on internal stupid stuff where I didn't see anything that was going on, right? You can read the news or whatever, but this is one of the problems when you work at a big company is that, especially the big publicly traded company, everything's quarter by quarter. And so remember, innovation is very long term. When you are at put aside startup, when you are at a big company, everything is whatever this information is, does it help me hit my number, right? If I have a P&L, I am measured by whether I can hit my actual number for the goal for my group, right? My business unit. And so anything that was irrelevant to that, right, I would not pay attention. Anything that would help me hit that number, because that's where you get your bonuses, that's where you get the big money. I'm yeah. And so you're focused quarter to quarter to quarter, you miss all these really interesting things. And so that's why fundamentally big companies suck at innovation because they never see this thing that's happening because they're super focused on the day-to-day.
And so currently now as a 500 partner, how do you distribute your time and effort maybe energy. So,
Yeah, it really.
so what
yeah.
actually changed?
Well, number one, I think because of my role, right, I spend a lot of time talking to startups, whether in my portfolio, which is fairly big now, it's really hard to manage, or spending time talking to new startups. And with every single new startup you meet, it's actually you get new ideas or you see new things, right? And so, this is a bleeding edge. I also spend a lot of time talking to my investors, right? So we have a lot of investors like outside big companies, funds of funds, family office. So I spend a lot of time with a lot of your investors too, right? Because they give you money, so you need to take care of them. And so it's either present portfolio, new companies, and also our investors. And that's a big part of my job, right? So every day is different. There are some days where I'm spending all my time talking to my LPs, or other days where our investors, and there's other days I'm spending like all my time talking to new startups. Or there are other days when the accelerator batch is in place, like 80% of my time is actually spent talking to my companies. And so it changes every day.
Yeah, so what would be like the efficient time and effort distribution for a successful founder? So for the portfolio that you manage, okay? So you see a founder and you say like, and you try to understand that person, to scan that person, and you see how he distributes his time, and like, what would we expect to see?
So what I would expect to see of a successful founder is you're probably spending 60 to 70% of your time external to potential partners, potential people that you hire, your investors, but I would say a big chunk of that is probably your customers or potential customers. You should be spending a disproportionate amount of your time talking to your customers or your potential customers. And I don't think startup founders do that enough. I think naturally, if you are a product person, if you're a technical person, your natural inclination is to spend time building. And I think in early stage, you should be spending most of your time talking to customers and trying to understand who they are, understand their problems, and not be afraid of technical debt.
So what actually comes first, building or going out?
Going out, no question in my mind. But I come from a sales and marketing background, so that is my inclination. But I see this as a huge issue, particularly in this region, where you have so many strong technical founders in general. It's easier for them, where I don't want to talk to people, I know what they want, so I'm just going to go build this thing. And what you end up doing is you end up building a bunch of stuff for a bunch of people that you haven't even talked with and not really understand what they want, right? And so you spend maybe half a year building something and all your money and time, and then you launch this thing and nobody wants it. That's a waste of time.
So, okay, other than this type of mixing the first and second step and runtime distribution, what else could be the red flag for a team? Because you say that you don't estimate the data analytics a lot, you estimate the team.
So not being metrics driven is really important. So understanding what are the things that you're measuring, right? So for early stage, sometimes it's actually an acquisition issue, but I would say it's more likely a retention issue. And that's helpful because, so I'll give you an example. I have a company right now, and I literally just saw them in New Zealand, awesome company. But what happened is that they're going to be doing maybe 150, 200,000 in monthly revenue. But what was happening is that their revenue growth went up, but then their churn rate went up dramatically. And I was just like, okay, well this points to me is that you're getting the wrong customers, or your messaging's wrong. And so stop growing, go and fix this thing instead of spending more money on ads and things. Like go fix maybe it's a product issue, but you need to dig in a little bit more to understand why your churn rate's gone up a lot, because it seems like you're getting in the wrong people. And so stop acquiring, look at more of the retention, or maybe it's an activation issue, I don't know. But I would say the biggest reason right now that I think a lot of startups, they think about having a bigger number, and I actually think it's less about having a bigger number. And so I've stolen this from a lot of people have said this, but they said it's better to have 100 really, really, really fanatical customers or users who love what you're doing versus having 1,000 or 1 million, users or customers who sort of like what you do.
Okay, and actually, I know that a couple of founders may have questions related to that. When you grow up and the churn rate is growing also, no? I say, I know that a couple of founders here may have this similar question of growing up the sales and revenue, and then the churn rate is also disbalanced now?
Yes, it's also the problem, because this summer we start selling, and at the same time our monthly burn money grows 4 times.
Yikes.
And so it was
not surprising, because I think that in the beginning, when you actually start, like I said, mentioned, you have this very, very narrow wedge and this very narrow customer segment, right? And so you serve them very well. And then what happens, you start to expand. And so you go, okay, I think this customer segment can also have the same issues, so we're going to go and focus on them. And then as you go out to the market, you learn, you bring them on board, you market to them, you sell to them, they come on board, but they end up churning out because something with the product, something about the messaging and expectation, or maybe they're the wrong customer. And so there's a lot of experimentation as you go and expand and expand and expand. That's why a lot of companies actually stall out, is because they hit this high growth path, and so a lot of times they're the early adopters. And then you have to adjust the product or adjust the marketing as you go to sort of the next wave. Or maybe it's a geographic thing.
The problem was that we expected that we will grow not so fast, and we signed a huge contract, and that's why we need a lot of technical support in Germany. And so that is why we have we need to pay for our charges right now, but on the next month we will get this money back from our customers.
Well, then that's not too bad, right? Like that's not marketing costs or whatever, I guess.
Yeah, it's like more like a cash flow thing.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's okay, but if you end up getting payback from, if there's like a 1 month payback on your upfront investment, that's actually not bad.
It's not actually bad, but it was very surprising. We did not expect to grow as fast as we
Well,
see.
that's a great problem to have, by the way. But the other thing I would say is just like one of the things I think a lot of startups, the typical failure of startups is not managing the cost structure well enough, right? So all of a sudden they raise money or they think that they're gonna do really well, so they overhire before the business comes in, and that's also death. So like I said, cash flow is what kills companies, right? Or lack of cash flow. And so and this is what I tell people, right? Like, why was the recession so painful for so many companies? Because the problem is when you look at on paper, they look fine, right? Because you go cash receivables, like, hey, we get this money, like, we're profitable. Yes, you're profitable, but the problem is if they'll pay you back, your customers will pay you in 90 days, and you have monthly costs of employees, and there's that imbalance, and you're relying on borrowing money to to sort of like make that up. That's dangerous. And so cash flow management is really important, and having cash reserves is also important.
So for early days cash flow management, what are the keys to success?
Super important. And so I would rather companies be cheaper and not overhire, and actually even have your team run very, very tight, even though it's hard for a period of time. And so you've heard the saying of just like hire slow, fire fast. Really, really, really important. You want to make sure your team is grinding very, very hard at the beginning, almost overstretched, slightly overstretched. Too overstretched is not good, right? But slightly overstretched is a good thing. It's actually...
But like in real numbers or facts, like how do you distinguish medium stretched, overstretched? Like what's the time to just go and have like day off so that you don't burn the team?
Yeah, well, here's the thing, right? I think that if you have a business model that's actually working, you want to push the team until you can actually end up building to sort of some break even or profitability. And so my view is, particularly for this region, it's much easier, and I would argue it's much better, it's not easier, it's actually much better to be break even, to get to break even, and to sort of like bootstrap than it is to try to raise money. I actually find that the investor base in the region, overall CE region, I don't think it's a great use of money. And so bootstrapping is actually really helpful because you are forced to actually manage your cash flow really, really tightly, because if you don't, you're dead. And there's something about startups of why I think startups do so well and why they're so innovative. And this is a pain of startups, is that, or the pain of being a human being, is that a lot of times your deepest insights actually happen when you're almost about to die. Right? And so there's this great saying of just like, nothing concentrates your mind like your execution in the morning. And so the reality is, of what I've seen for a lot of my companies, the reality is what I've seen for even me personally, of just like, when I've had, and this sucks, right? But the only time you get these like deep insights on your life, on whatever it is, on your own personal business, is like when you're just about to sort of like, holy crap, like this is clearly not working out. If I do not figure this out, like, I'm toast personally, and I see that with a lot of my startups, is that a lot of times they've raised a bunch of money and they spend this money, it's going nowhere because they get a little bit comfortable, a little bit lazy, and all of a sudden they realize, wow, I just have like 2 months or 3 months, and they make these changes, either cutting their burn rate, they're forced to do a bunch of very dramatic things. They change a couple of things, they change their messaging, they focus on a specific customer, they change certain sort of like product features, and all of a sudden their business just turns around. And I've seen that over and over and over and over again. And so it's very rare that somebody has a lot of money in the bank and then they figure out this thing. Very, very rare. A lot of times they figure out this thing where it's like, crap, we are almost going, if we do not figure this out right now, we're dead. They have this like late night like insight. And so that's part of the reason I think like why I think big companies never get major innovations, because they always have cash flow, and that's why they slowly degrade over time, because they get too comfortable.
But basically, like there are two motivations for more, like go for something better. So is it possible in the startup world to have this positive motivation of go for something more? Other than
Your
just
positive
avoid the
motivation,
more
yeah, your
function?
positive motivation in startups is not to die,
Okay.
right? And sometimes, like this is what I've seen with a lot of startups, is sometimes that's actually the secret of just a lot of times you're too early, right? And so can you survive long enough until the market turns? Timing actually is really important. And so that's why like startups is really, really hard. And so I do not recommend this lifestyle for everybody. Like not everybody should be doing startups and being an entrepreneur. It is like everyone make it out to be so glamorous. Like it's really, 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 really hard, right? And so a lot of times like, are you working on something? And this is why we care about, like, I invest in missionaries and not mercenaries. I'm investing in founders who are working on problems that they are personally very interested in, right? Like that. Because the likelihood of success is very low, in my opinion, being an entrepreneur. So if you're gonna spend your time working on something, at least enjoy it and and at least you're gonna not look back and go, man, I wasted all my time doing this thing. Or like, you're gonna work on this regardless, right? Versus I think people who I talk to founders, they go, you know what, I'm gonna work on this thing and sell it in 3 years. I'm like, good luck with that. Like I just have very rarely seen that happen.
Have you taken like false negative decision? I mean, you turned down the team, you didn't invest, and then you see it's like, wow, it's making 50x. Did it happen?
Sometimes, right? But a lot of times it's just like, here's the thing. I don't think I make the mistake. Here's why I make the mistake, right? I usually make a mistake on, usually not on misreading the team. I make a mistake on sort of like the explosiveness of the market. And so figuring out how big a market is, that's where I probably get it wrong most of the time. Versus sort of the team, where I would rather under-index on getting the team wrong. So a lot of times, like, I think I misread teams sometimes where, like, I'll give you an example, like there was a Ukrainian founder, and if I'm very, very honest, super mercenary. And that business actually seems to be doing well right now. I'm still very skeptical though, because I know in the back of this person's head, they are going to sell, they want to sell this company. The minute somebody gives them a good offer of like, I'm gonna give you $50 million, they'll sell. There's no question in my mind. And so for me, I still don't regret making this investment in that company, because I fundamentally think like this person's been working on for the last like 2-3 years for it. I don't think he's gonna last to 5 years, because I know the minute they get an offer, he's just gonna quit. And so I'm looking for missionary founders where one of the things I look for is this founder gonna work on this thing for the next like 7 to 10 years of their lives, right? Like they're gonna try to make this work over the next 7 to 10 years, and even if it is successful, like they're gonna push very, very hard. That's what I'm looking for. This is one of the challenges in a lot of the emerging regions I look at. But a lot of them are like, I'm gonna work on it, I'm gonna sell this. So I was just in New Zealand, and I talked to 25, 30 founders, and I saw 3 really, really interesting businesses. The market was really interesting, the product was really interesting, great traction. And and I will give them credit, at least they were very honest. They're like, I'm like, okay, well what's your goal, what's your game plan? And they're like, well, my goal is that, I'm not the guy who wants to scale, and the reality is that I want to have a nice life, so the business is doing fine now. Like, I just want to sell this company to whatever big company there is in Silicon Valley, 2 years and 3 years from now. And I told them, like, great, at least you're honest about it, but like you should not raise money from VCs, because that means that your goals are very different than sort of what a VC goals are, right? Because there's been no company that's worth several $1 billion that has done this in shorter than 9 to 12 years.
Wow.
It takes a long time. And so if you think that you're gonna go start a company and sell it in 3 years for like $1 billion, like, no way, it's impossible.
Maybe when this.
Or it's fraud, right? So either way, like I'm saying, like, you have another problem, so you go to jail.
Yeah, so, but maybe sometimes people may mean that they just want to step back to give the good way to operational management, because quite
Yeah,
often,
and
like
sometimes that's okay.
good founders, like they may be not perfect with operations, so they just step back and give professional management. This may be what they mean.
Yeah, so I would say generally speaking, yes. But I would say if you look at a lot of the super successful companies right now, a lot of times they're still founder CEOs even after 7 or 8 years. Because I just think like being a founder CEO, they think about the business very, very differently, right? So if you think about like, you know, everyone uses example like Amazon or like Facebook or Alibaba or Tencent. I'm just like, at least Alibaba, the CEO just stepped down, right? But most companies, most of these like super aggressive companies, they're like founder CEOs because, or Apple under Steve Jobs, not now, but Apple under Steve Jobs, like super aggressive founders willing to cannibalize their own business because they look at it as their own business. Versus if you're a professional manager, you think about the business in a very different way.
I see. So what you started to talk about, like Ukrainian team. How many Ukrainian teams or startups do you have in portfolio?
For
Or
me,
any.
yeah, for me personally, I think I'm like in my personal portfolio
Yeah.
of 500. I think it's like 3 now. Yes, 3. But I've looked at a lot of Ukrainian companies.
A lot is like how many? Like 5?
40, 50,
Oh.
more than that, probably at least 100 or something. I've looked at a lot.
It's like over 1 year, several years.
Last 2 years. for
Last
sure.
2 years.
Yeah, last 2 years for sure.
That's a lot, because sometimes I just try to estimate in numbers the amount of Ukrainian startups. That's not much more. I mean, you're already seeing like big part of the market. And like always now in our media we have this story that like Ukrainian founders in Kyiv is like the next Berlin. So what it takes to be a Berlin other than like 2 airports, a river, and maybe good paintings on the streets and street food. Like, how do you estimate the ecosystem, like the whole thing happening, the amount of talent?
I mean, here's why I think Ukraine is actually interesting, right? I think that you have this generation now of, you know, there's Grammarly, there's a generation of like really interesting companies like Riedel and MacPaw, and so what I see that's interesting is that you're starting to see some folks actually start to leave these companies, right? And then also on top of it, you have so much technical talent, and if I'm very honest, like the economy's a mess, right? And so that's actually helpful. And I'll say this, right? Like, use the example of Nokia, right? The best thing that happened to Finland was actually from the startup ecosystem was Nokia dying. Because all of a sudden you had a whole bunch of people actually come onto the market, like very qualified people. And so I use the example of one of my good friends, a guy named Steliefti, right? He runs Close.io, and he asked, like people ask him just like, why did you become an entrepreneur? And he jokes, but not really jokes. It's just like lack of, like sort of like lack of other opportunities, right? Like nobody would hire me, so I kind of had to do it. And he jokes, but like he's joking, but also not joking. He's an incredible entrepreneur. And sometimes if you're if I'm very honest, like being an entrepreneur is like really, really hard, right? Not to say I know anything about that. I work with a lot of entrepreneurs. Like it is not a easy lifestyle. So I have great respect for anybody who tries the entrepreneurial route, right? Because like you are working all the time. Usually a lot of times your percentage of success is incredibly low, but it's one of those things that is like, it's an outlier business, right? But when you do well, you do very, very, very well. And that's why I think I care a lot about investing in missionaries, and why I always ask founders, I'm like, why are you doing this, right? Because a lot of times they're like, well, I'm gonna do this, gonna make all this money. I'm like, okay, if you're really chasing money, you're better off going to Wall Street. You're better off being a management consultant. Go do that, right? Like you're gonna make a decent living. Like if that's your focus, go do that. Or work at Google or Facebook, right? Like that's probably a better thing for you. Like if you're joining and doing a startup because you think you're gonna make a lot of money, the odds of that happening is pretty low. So make sure you're working on something you really care about, or you're like really, really interested in.
So what's your personal motivation? Like, why did you join 500 Startups as a partner? Like, you want to change the planet? Or like you want to earn a lot of money like all the startup people?
I could tell you I made way more money at Yahoo than I did at 500. But having said that, like I just thought like I really loved the mission of what 500 500 is, right? And so when I joined them in 2014, like they were just sort of starting to rise. And I love the mission of just, there's talent everywhere. 500 is one of the very few accelerators, one of the very few startup sort of like investors in Silicon Valley. They invested everywhere. And so I love that. And I also love the sales and marketing focus, so they really valued a lot of my experience. And I also think the impact that you have of just being able to sort of like work with so many founders, you learn a lot of stuff. And so I was talking about the model of this. I love the mission of just, the motto is talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And so our job is to actually equalize that, right? And provide opportunities, invest in founders, in regions, in places, invest in people that a lot of, whether it's minorities, females over men, like investing in sort of these assets that are sort of unappreciated. And I love that. Like that's just an amazing mission. And so that's part of the reason and the impact. And I really like the people I worked with. Sort of when I especially joined, I worked with some really, really smart people over the last 5 years there. So that's been really great.
Okay. Any questions?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Can you give a few, tips or advice on a very basic equity structure before you get the first investor, either angel or seed or something?
You mean from a founder's perspective?
From a
Or?
founder, exactly, yeah. Or maybe it should be just one. So team, founder, first investor, and the second question, in terms of the valuation of that. How do you value something which is in a very early stage and that is comfortable for the investor and for you as a founder?
So here's what I was saying, Joe. So let's talk the first question first, right? So the question is, how do you split the equity, blah, 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 right, between the different people? And so there's actually if you go like Google this, like Google TechCrunch is like splitting the pie, is one methodology to go and figure that out, right? So for example, if say you're single, but your co-founder is potentially giving up like a very big job, so he needs more salary, right?
Yeah.
Then the difference is then you should probably have more equity. If it's an unequal salary where he's like, I need a minimum of this amount of money because I have a family, whatever, then you should have more equity, and he should have he should have a higher salary and less equity, right?
Okay.
So there's different ways to look at it, and the one thing with equity for sure that everybody needs to do, you need to have vesting.
Okay.
Very, very important, right? So let's just say it's 2 of you, right? So I'm making this up where it's like 49, 51%, or maybe you have 3 founders where it's like 33, 33, 33, which by the way, I don't think is a great scheme. But let's say hypothetically it's like you split it. And what ends up happening, this is where I've seen this so often, having screwed up cap tables. And so what would happen is that if you do not put investing, so for example, you're investing over 4 years, your first 25% of that is actually, you only invest after you spend more than 1 year. I've seen a lot of screwed up cap tables because 3 founders start at the same time and there's no vesting, and one of the founders halfway through the year is like, I don't want to do this anymore. And then they have 33% of the company, like that's a screwed up cap table, right? And so having vesting is very, very important. From a valuation perspective, the reality is that valuation in this stage is driven by the market. Everything's supply and demand, right? So for example, if you're trying to raise, and my general view is that Central Eastern European or European investors, whether it's angels or whether it's VCs, the valuations tend to be just much lower here because you have a lot of founders and a lot of companies and you don't have a lot of money, right, or a lot of investors. And so the valuations tend to be much lower. Frankly speaking, I see a lot of screwed up cap tables where the investor owns like 40 or 50% of the company. You're done. The reality is that you will not be able to raise money from any institutional investor. And so I'll give you an example of, so when I didn't even think about cap tables, I didn't understand, right? So my first year and a half, most of my companies are mainly US, actually majority of them were like mainly US companies. And so usually less of an issue because there's a little bit more of a supply and demand balance. In one batch, my 4th batch, I started investing in a lot of international founders, a lot of international companies, and I had 3 European startups. Every single one of them had screwed up cap tables. I didn't realize that. I had to spend the whole month fixing these cap tables. It's a complete nightmare. And after that, I'm like, nope, always ask international companies what their cap table looks like, because I don't care how much I love the company, how much I love the business, how much I love the market. The cap table screwed up, it's too much work for me. And so really understand, so typically at every single stage of money that you're raising, you're giving up between 15 to 25%. Anything more than that, your cap table's messed up.
And that's based, so just in my experience, maybe I'm wrong, that with the burn rate that I'm actually forecasting. So I'm saying I'm not like greedy, and I'm not trying to go with the value, but it's just I need, for example, 200 grand, and so I'm looking for 200 grand, and I don't want to mess up my cap. So this is like, let's play with these boundaries. Is that the right approach?
Yeah, the right, here's the way I think about this, right? I think that first of all, for lack of dilution, right? But you also want to optimize for how much money you actually need to hit sort of that milestone.
Right.
And so first of all, you look at, my take is that, look at the milestone and go, hey, based on this, you know, whatever, make up the numbers, 100,000 users or whatever that milestone is, right? Or some revenue target.
Yeah.
I need to hit this revenue target in 1 year's time from now, right? Like that's my milestone. And then also need to budget maybe anywhere between 3 months to 6 months of buffer because stuff goes wrong, right? So then go, okay, I need $200,000. That's the number. Then based on that, you go, okay, I shouldn't give up more than like 20% of the company. Maybe I look at, you know, $1 million valuation or something. I make, you know, it's a basic number, right? Like I want to give up as least as possible. So that's kind of my minimum valuation. If somebody's not willing to give that to you, then you need to rethink, should I go and raise this money or not? Or should I just go and expand my depth of investor and just start talking to more investors to go and see what the market's willing to sustain? So my general view is that you need to be talking to probably like, it's not like 5 or 6 or 7 investors, you're talking to 50 to 100 for possible. But remember, I'm in Silicon Valley where there's lots and lots of investors, so we have it very different, so there's a lot of depth there. It's much harder here. And so in most companies, I talk to them, I'm like, just bootstrap.
So is it possible to fundraise once you're like still located in Ukraine and you want
Totally.
to fundraising like internationally?
Totally. That's possible.
Just use the Google, use the internet, right?
There's this thing called the airplane. You can fly over. You know, it's called the internet. Do your research. This thing called LinkedIn. Get connections. Like there's a whole bunch of tools available that you can figure it out.
I just don't see a lot of Ukrainian startups do international fundraising. I mean,
Or London. Right?
why London?
Lots of investors in London.
Why not Istanbul?
No, you want to
not
go
there.
Istanbul.
I mean, like there's a lot of cash there.
Not a lot of smart investors.
Okay.
I mean, it's not that they're not smart. They don't understand tech. Just like here.
So
There's a lot of money here. They don't understand tech.
So, but okay, what are the top 5 global places or global capitals to fundraise for tech money, for tech startups?
Globally? Okay, putting aside China, I would say
Why
like,
to put aside?
okay, so here's my take. China's a very different beast, so unless you're focusing on the Chinese market, it makes no sense to have Chinese investors. Additionally now, with sort of, unfortunately with our trade war between the US and China, the reality is that if you take money from Chinese investors, it will make it very, very hard, especially if you are in very specific areas like cybersecurity, you handle strategic areas. The reality is that if you take Chinese money, you will not be able to raise in the US. That's the reality of it. And so put aside China. That's why I say put aside China. And it's just a different beast. So I wouldn't take Chinese money, in my opinion, right now. I think 3-4 years ago, it'd be very different. And so I would say, if you look at where a lot of the money is from fundraising, I think New York, lots of money in New York. And there's a very big growing ecosystem. You know, Silicon Valley, obviously that's where most of the money is right now. London for Europe, and I would say Berlin too. That's it.
Okay,
Yeah.
but 4.
Yeah,
Just
that's it.
keep it
Those are the ones I
four.
kind of mind.
Okay.
And even Berlin, I'm like, maybe. It's probably more London. There's way more money in London.
Okay. You have a question?
Thank you for this speech and presentation. During one of the moments, you mentioned that it's critical to focus on one of the segments, on one specific customer.
Super narrow.
Super narrow, and I fully support. But what if you are in the position? We are currently all asset. Our, like, let's say, key product, which we believe is going to be the key product. We launched in June, and since then, for 3 months, we took 3 different segments. And we've been working with each of the segments, 20, 30, 50 people, constantly in touch. And but we are still having like early adopters, so we didn't have to go into the scale.
Sure.
So we currently have more or less 3 profiles of customers, and one of them is a corporate profile. What would be your advice in this case? Whether to try to scale 3 of them and see which one works best, or still.
What have you learned from these 3 segments? Which one is performing better?
What is the metric? How do you estimate performing better?
Because we
Could be
didn't-
usage. I mean, I don't know your product. Is it a consumer product? Is it a B2B product? What?
So it's study day pass. You subscribe to.
It's a what?
It's the name study die. So you subscribe to educational events. So you have an online platform where you have educational courses. This 1 hour on project management, public speaking trainings. So one of the customers we have, and we call it like frequent user, Tonya. She's 20, 21. She bought a number of Tonyas who bought like 4 or 5 times this subscription in 3 months. And she's just young, she wants to know everything. That's why she's doing quite well. Then the next segment is the casual who goes to an educational event.
Not the question I'm asking. I don't need the profiles, right? It's a longer conversation, but the question I have is, which one is performing better, where you see them coming back and using this?
All of them currently. I mean,
All of them.
companies subscribe for 3-4 months, and both of the segments from B2C are also renewing in the same or less proportion. So it's difficult to say that, yeah, here we have retention 2%.
How much? Let me ask you another question. How much time have you actually spent interviewing and talking with them?
During the last 2 months, like 50-60% of the
Okay.
time. Yeah.
So then, okay, that's good. These are good things. And so let me ask you a question. What's your hypothesis of which one you think, this is art, not science, which one do you think is going to be, based on the data, the conversations that you have, if the data shows that they're all sort of like equal right now, but you've had these like conversations of what's driving their usage and why they're doing this, which one are you inclined to sort of like?
We have one, the frequent user,
The frequent
and
user?
we are going to focus on our advertising.
Okay.
But at the same time, this B2B is also corporate growing, and like we have the fourth and the fifth company which are coming, and we never looked into, before last year presentation in Kyiv, when you were idea about going into B2B we studied. This was actually part of your idea.
So my take in general is I think you have to pick. Like, I just think it's, sometimes it's like you pick with like the information, other times actually just flip a coin. And here's why I recommend, I don't care if it's B2B, I don't care if it's B2C. I think that you need to sort of make a judgment call on focusing on one, because the analogy I use is just like how you grow is by being a lazy and afford it. And why going that laser where it's like, oh, what I pick wrong? Here's the thing, if you actually go super deep and you realize it's not working, you've learned something, you pull back and then you go to the other direction. When you try to execute 2 at the same time or 3 at the same time, a lot of times you go, okay, was I not successful because I did the wrong ones? Was it not successful because I just half-assed it and just wasn't focused? And so I actually think the insights that you get from going super deep, even if it isn't successful, you'll find out much faster. And that's easier said than done, because here's the thing with human beings in general, right? We're natural ones, like, how do we have more optionality, right? Like have a lot of options, try these different things, and I'm just like, and that is actually counterintuitive of just going really, really deep, right? Now every one of us have that issue, just like, let's do a whole bunch of different things and see what works. And what I've realized is that companies actually try to do too many things. It's very, very hard to do that. You have to focus. Right? Easier said than done. And it's not natural.
Yeah, I see, like,
I want to make a remark about the company introduced in Ukraine. I spoke to Anis Kuli from
Of course. It's simple.
around some months ago when he was in Kyiv, and he said to me that 500 startups are not investing in companies which are listed in Ukraine and will not do it in the nearest time. what is your opinion?
So I mean, Ukrainian entity.
Yeah.
So I like Ukrainian companies. The entity is very hard to invest in, right? So all the Ukrainian companies I invested in have headquarters here, based, and they're focusing on the U.S. market, or they have U.S. customers already. So yeah, because here's the thing. Like I'm like, Ukraine as a market, yeah, it's all right. I care about. This is where the opportunity is, right? The opportunity is companies from here that go global. So all those companies I mentioned, Grammarly, Riedel, MacPaw, most of their business is actually in the US. So it's doable. So he's right, I agree on that part. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with actually having a business focusing on Ukraine. This is your market, you have a natural edge, but I think from the VC perspective, there are questions about the size of the market.
But it's also about registration also.
It's the size of the market, and registration is a nightmare, right? So yeah, it's not easy to invest in a Ukrainian entity.
As I understood that you just said that you need to be registered in USA, and then we can talk.
He's right.
Steps, yeah.
He's right.
You mentioned that if startup and VC have different financial goals, you don't take money from VC. So my question is, what is financial goals for VC? So how many revenue in 5-10 years, or maybe capitalization
look,
or other metrics?
So you have to understand how VC, and I didn't understand this until I was a VC. I didn't even understand for the first like 1 or 2 years as a VC, right? Now like 5.5 years, oh, okay, I get this now. Of like why certain deals are done and why certain deals are not done. I'm very slow, right? So every deal that I do has to have the opportunity or potential of becoming $1 billion business. So, because think about the portfolio, right? Like for every 10 investments I make, the death rate is very, very high. So the returns on that one successful company in 10 or the one successful company in 20 has to make up for all the losses. So that means the returns, your economics, a VC would rather you go all out and fail, right? Like to go all out and potentially become $1 billion company than have like a 2x return or a 5x return that's actually not big enough. So and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but you have to understand the mentality of most venture capitalists. It's just like, you have to go all out. I'd rather you go for a 10x and 20x or 100x return to become that multi-billion-dollar company, or go to zero, right? It's like one or the other. And that kind of makes sense, right? I mean, from their perspective. I'm not saying that's the right thing, and that's why I think it's very, very important when you are talking to the VC, and this is why it's super important, and why I appreciate founders who are honest. They're just like, my goal is to sell this in 3 years. I'm like, okay, great. Don't raise any money for any VCs, because that's not their expectation. And I think that's where a lot of the breakdowns of just bad communications, it's like a marriage, right? So for example, it's like you get married to somebody and you want a kid, they don't want a kid. That's not going to end well, right? Because your ex, this is not a great analogy, but it is the same analogy. It's just like you want different things. And so if you go in and you're lying to each other about this, or you're not honest, or you're not transparent about what your requirements or just expectations are, that is not going to be a happy ending in that relationship. The VC and sort of like startup founder sort of like relationship, it's the same thing. Weird analogy, but it's the same thing.
You mentioned that you guys have this magic intuition of really figuring out, what's gonna become the billion-dollar company.
We don't, for the record. We don't. No VC. Anyone who says that is lying to you. They got lucky.
No, hold on a second. I certainly understand that you don't. I'm just intuition in trying to sort of predict, what's gonna, explode. And you mentioned just a while back that, there's been instances where you sort of predicted where the explosion is gonna be. Those instances where you failed. So, can you?
Most of the time, I failed, for the record. Picking, right?
So can you talk about the times when you actually sort of figured it out, and like, what is the intuition? What's the thought process that you guys use, like, to see what's going to happen around the corner? I'm just curious.
I mean, look, as a VC, this is why I love doing the VC job, right? Your job is to be on the bleeding edge and to learn. You just have to read a lot of stuff, talk to a lot of stuff. I'm not talk to a lot of stuff. I read a lot of stuff, but talk to a lot of people. Talk to a lot of VCs, other VCs, talk to a lot of founders. You just have to learn. You have to be a learning machine, right? So you have to start developing a thesis of the world. It's part of the job is to get a lot of data, and you have to process it and then build your own thesis and view of where the world is going. And so for example, I invested in a company on ManyChat, right? I was like, Messenger, this is back in 2015 when I invested in them. Young founder, super entrepreneurial, dad was an entrepreneur, got great sort of like, great feedback on them, but didn't really have anything, and so it was a messenger marketing platform, right? But they didn't really have anything. And I remember I got a lot of pushback. Thankfully, I run the program, so I can actually go and like make these bets, investments. And I remember I made that investment. People were like, why do you do this? I don't really get this. This is before sort of like the whole bot craze and messenger things sort of like happened. And it turned out to work well, but it sort of fit the thesis of sort of where I thought the world was going, right? I'm like, okay, messengers have become a very dominant platform for communications in general. For young people's the future, blah, 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 blah. Nobody else owns a space. And Michael had this very unique insight on sort of like what was his vision on sort of what that was going to be, right? And he was very thoughtful about this vision. I'm like, wow, I need to go and make that bet, right? So, and I also thought the timing was right when you started seeing Messenger actually explode. So, if I'm very honest, I just got lucky. It wasn't like I had this like deep insight. Like, it's one of the many bets. I made 51 bets for that batch, right? So, kind of got lucky. So there was no deep insight, but I thought from a trend perspective and timing perspective, and I got lucky.
Alright. My question is, how the partners of startups evaluate the founders with families, with kids?
How do 500 startups evaluate founders with kids? I mean, I don't think it's a bad thing. Like there's no archetype. Here's my opinion. In our view, I don't think there's an archetype of what's a good founder, what's not a good founder, the profile, right? Like I'll invest in young founders, or like unmarried founders, or I'll invest in like whatever it is, right? Like I have all types of founders, right? Like male, female, young people, older. Like I don't care about that. I don't think that these archetypes directly point to. I could point to counter arguments and arguments for and against for each of these things, right? And so I just don't think that's that important, in my opinion. And sometimes actually, family, people who have families, they are actually much more focused, right? Because they have to make it work. So, but on the other hand, sometimes like they're also much more risk averse. Like the minute it stops to work, they quit. So I've actually kind of seen both. So I don't know if there's one archetype.
And also if they also have some businesses, but now launching a new project, I understand that investors are looking for those who are full-time concentration in new projects, but if they have established some kind of like a temporary model for how work week on the a sustainable business and now launching a new project.
I don't know. I'm mixed on that. I actually think that I don't think there's anything wrong with it per se, right? But I think as an investor looking at it, where you already have a business and you're sort of running it, and then you're going to start this other one, I just think like you're either all in or you're not. But as a VC versus, I just think in general, all of us should side business. Everyone should be doing that. And actually, I'm speaking at I think the Freedom Business Summit on Saturday about that topic. Like I actually fundamentally think like even if you're an employee, you should have a side business. But as long as it's not competitive to your job, right? Like don't do that. Do your job well and have a side business. But I think as a startup founder, as a VC, I kind of want you all in on this. I don't want somebody working part-time on this, right? Because I'm investing third-party money, and for you to go all out, like it kind of got to be like 100%. Doesn't mean like if you aren't raising VC money, you should do that. Yes, sir.
You talked about that our first market should be narrow, yeah, very narrow. But all VCs that
Has to be a big market.
Yeah, it should be a big market, 1 billion market, sure, at least, yeah. For example, so if you know that your first market, US market, our target market, it's not like 1 billion market, but 100 million market, sure.
So what you have to do is you have to point to, there's two things, right? Maybe the market's small, but you have to be able to show how is this market changing that it's going to eventually grow very, very fast and become $1 billion market. right? So, and sometimes that's not always very obvious, but you should have the consumer insight in that. So either that, or it's here's $100 million market, but if once we own this one, here's a bunch of other several $100 million markets that this could help us based on the product and the customer segments that allow us to go into sort of a larger circle. So it's almost like you start here, small circle, right? Then you sort of have a concentric circle, the next thing, then the next thing, right? So you have to sort of paint that picture of like, where does this go?
So if we have a big vision and this like our very first market, and we will expand to the other markets. And
I mean, it has to make sense, right? So you have to be able to show how the small market is going to lead you to the next one, and then the next one, and next one. Like, it's almost a story, but it has to make sense, or at least be rational. And it could be right or wrong, but at least you should have some view on that.
okay.
So, I guess that
Sorry. At the beginning, you mentioned that the balanced team is bare minimum for a startup. What is the balanced team?
Balanced team is preferably somebody that's strong on the business side, right? Sales, marketing, etc. Somebody that's strong on the technical side. And even better if you add on somebody that's actually a good designer, good from a UX side. That's a good rule in general.
I mean, is it possible to have it not in like international, but like national team, so that all these people come from the same midst, from the same city? So like we have like lots of technical talent, but like the design talent is less. So is it possible to get this all this perfect team within like one city?
I mean, certain cities, yes, right? So obviously New York and San Francisco Bay Area, like, yeah, you could find those people. It is a little bit harder in some of these other cities. In London, I think you're starting to see some development there. But yeah, it is tougher in some of these regions where technical talent is super, super strong, right? Business talent, design talent needs some work, but it is getting better.
But like, just imagine you would love to have like international team. How would you do it?
So I have one company, and they're doing really, really well now, right? So if you go to if you go to Middle East, in Middle East, there's actually have a lot of really strong commercial-minded people. There's like no technical people, or not very good technical people. And I would say it's actually a very good marriage. So it's a half Ukrainian, half like the headquarters is in Dubai, the team is from Jordan and Dubai, like super strong like sales and marketing. And then you also have like their technical team is in the technical team and back office is actually in Lviv. Lviv? Am I saying that right? Lviv? Yeah, so it's an interesting mix of it's like half Ukrainian and half Middle Eastern, and they're doing really, really well right now. It's just a perfect marriage.
Good. So okay, couple of more questions here. Go.
So am I okay to go?
Yeah, go.
I was going to ask you about the operations management a little bit. So once you got the money, that's fast, and you have your product metrics and all the good jazz. Tell me about the operations management. When do you expect the founders to start putting the OKRs, sort of targets and those type of targets?
I'm actually not a fan of the OKRs.
I know, whatever the metric
or whatever it is.
Yeah.
There's this joke, right? Somebody said this. It's just like I think OKRs is something that Google sort of like popularized to inflict on the rest of Silicon Valley because particularly it's being adopted by startups and adopted by other companies to basically mess them up.
Really?
Yeah, it's funny. We use OKRs. I'm not a fan, if I'm honest. I think there's a lot of the concept itself is interesting. I don't know. I think the execution itself is maybe not as good.
So why not?
I just haven't seen it work super well, right? And I actually think like it's so easy to go and take these things like Google uses this, so it must work really, really well everywhere else. I don't think so, because the fact that Google has a monopoly on search ads. And so I think sometimes you draw the wrong, don't mistake sort of like correlation for causation, right? Like, I don't know, it's just like, there's some questions there. And so I think Google is a very unique company. Like every successful company is unique in different ways. And I think what ends up happening is like, basing your success or taking best practices from an outlier company sometimes can cause a lot of damage.
So what's the operating system that works then?
I think you need to be thoughtful about what it works, sort of what makes sense for you. So for example, like I'm actually a fan, like for example, a lot of basic things that I've taken is actually just from like Peter Drucker, right? You know, the effective executive, on management, like a lot of stuff he talks about. Like this book has been around for like 30 years. And a lot of people don't practice what he has, right? Like it's a very basic book, or OKRs, if I recall correctly. I haven't read this book for a long time, but like high output management from Intel, like that's actually a really good book, man. I don't believe everything in there, but there's certain things in there that are like useful, right?
You're kidding, but actually the Drucker together with and the group were actually the ones who inspired the OKRs.
Yeah, I know, but I think that there's inspiration for driving certain things, but some strategies or some tactics get taken to sort of like, you have to understand the context of these type of businesses, and where it might make sense in this business, it might not make sense in other ones. But having said that, it's just like, you have to take these frameworks and then use these frameworks to adopt it for your situation. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of companies, a lot of founders, a lot of management, they take these concepts and they blindly adopt them. Does that make sense?
Sure. I mean, I went through that stuff. Sure. Thanks.
You said that besides a narrow customer segment, you have to have narrow product features, so very small. What do you mean by this? To what extent this product should be?
So here's what I found over and over and over again, and I stole this from somebody, where sometimes I think too many companies or too many startups actually build too many features actually into their product. And so what you'll find, if you really, really do a lot of analysis, what you'll find is that the main reason, based on interviews, based on seeing usage of these products, a lot of times what you're going to find is that the customer is mainly using your product for one core feature, most of the time. And sometimes the way to do this, and this is, by the way, a very gutsy and brave thing to do, of what you want to do, the way you find out sometimes, especially in an early stage where you don't have as much to lose, every week you take away one feature. And here's how you figure out if your customers scream and yell, we're like, what are you doing? Then what you're gonna find out a lot of times is that most of the time as you take away the features, nobody notices. Then that helps you kind of nail that down, right? By the way, very, very few people do this, so I'm not saying you should do this, but the point I'm trying to make is that what you'll find for every single product, even the successful products now, you look back, they focused on one feature set that was like 10 times better than anything else out there with one core use case. And then over time, they added more features. That's the way that you get that wide shape.
Okay, one more question. And
One
then
more question, I apologize, I have to run for another meeting.
What's your top 3 books about?
Top 3 books. The Hard Thing About Hard Things by Horowitz. I think it's the best book recently to come out about startups. I think Secrets of Sand Hill Road by Scott Cooper. Just, if you want to understand how VC works in Silicon Valley, it may not be relevant for you, but I think it's helpful to understand. And then Lean Startup by Eric Ries. It's a classic. How many people have actually read it? Right? This is half the room, right? But let me ask you another question. How many people actually practice it? Yeah, right. I don't believe that. But anyway, so we'll see, right? But I see this a lot. It's like a lot of people say they've read it, and the only thing they've gotten out of it is pivot, right? And I think a lot of they don't understand a lot of the principles, or they don't follow. Even in Silicon Valley, I'm surprised. Just a lot of my companies don't follow that.
can be. So once again, just to have the good, bright point at the end, how many companies are there now that are in your portfolio? What is that, all my companies in the portfolio, how many there?
So 500 overall is about 2,300 companies. My portfolio that I'm investing in the last 500 years is 476.
And what's the plan for the nearest couple of years?
I don't know, I'm just trying to survive. I'm just trying to survive.
So do you feel like this point of enlightenment is coming, because you said today that when you're trying to survive, there should come enlightenment, and you do some visionary, and then you make a next step.
That's a great question. I mean, I would love to I feel like I learn stuff all the time. Every single batch I learn new things. I learn how to run the program hopefully a little bit better. I learn new things and new insights about founders. I learn new things about certain business models and tactics. So I'm always learning. I feel like as long as I'm learning, I'll stay. If I'm not, or stay doing what I'm doing, the minute I stop learning, there's probably time to find something else.
Okay. Thanks for coming so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.